Hello, we are back with more common knowledge for your viewing and or listening pleasure. I don't know how you watch these or listen to these, as the case may be. I'm going to look at 10 common Magic the Gathering cards here and tell you, are they any good in the Pauper format or not? Most of them aren't, because most commons aren't very good, but sometimes we find some good ones, and sometimes we find some really hidden gems, and that's the fun of the series, in my opinion. We'll start with Lone Wolf, 2 and a green for a 2/2 wolf. And you may have this creature assign its combat damage as though it weren't blocked. I've always liked that line of text, even if the creatures that it's on are generally pretty bad. I do remember Lone Wolf. I don't know the. I've never seen this Portal Second Age art. That's incredible. And the Urza's Legacy, like that's where I'm starting to like, okay, this art, I certainly played it with the 8th edition art. I owned copies of this card. Never owned the Urza's Legacy one. There's a Portal 3 Kingdoms. Hey, we just talked about that. And that's, that art's fine. 7th edition. I've never seen that 7th edition art either. And then they stopped making it after 8th edition because it's not a very good creature. It really isn't. 3 mana for a 2/2 is bad. It's a bad rate, especially in green. You should be able to do so much better stats-wise for a creature in green. But they don't want to make the stats too good because the idea here is you can deal combat damage as though it weren't blocked. So what that means, because they phased this out of Magic at this point, I don't think you ever see this line of text on creatures anymore. My favorite creature who had this is Rocks. Not this 10th edition Rocks, this Nemesis Rocks. That's my boy right there. Also in 8th edition, so that's the Lone Wolf and this guy kind of go hand in hand. Rocks is great because he can regenerate, so it's awesome. Lone Wolf, though, to get back here, this does not mean your creature is unblockable. This means that even if your creature gets blocked, they can still do the damage to the player, but they're just not doing damage to the creature now. So the opponent's creature, the blocking creature, is still going to be doing damage to the Lone Wolf. And at that point, it's like, okay, I can get 2 damage into the opponent once, because they'll probably block it with something with 2 power, and then my wolf dies. I got in with damage, to the opponent, but then it's dead. And what did I really pay for? I spent 3 mana on this. When it has toughness that's this bad, Rocks is pretty good because it's a 5/5 creature. It's sturdy, so it can take a hit, and you could keep doing that turn over turn. And that's why Rocks is rare, and this is a common. And then the regenerate for Rocks is also good because you can go, oh, you can kill my guy? Well, I'll just regenerate him and keep him alive, and we're fine. Lone Wolf does not have any of those niceties, and it means the card is actually pretty terrible. But I do have some nostalgia for it. I want to give it just a touch more than I'd normally give it because of nostalgia. But overall, this is a pretty terrible card. I'm gonna give it. I don't think it quite dips into 1 territory. There are things you can do with this. If you loaded this thing up with equipment or something, or auras, and you got in 1 big swing, that's pretty cool. I mean, if you've loaded up with equipment and auras, maybe its toughness is enough where it can take those hits from the enemy blockers, and then you can, like Rocks, turn over turn, do some big damage, and their blockers are irrelevant. So I guess I got to give it some more points out of that, but it's, this is not a creature to really build around in your deck. You're going to take the Bogle that just has trample on it. You gave it Armadillo Cloak, it's got trample. You don't really need to worry about assigning combat damage as though it weren't blocked. That's not really a big deal. I'll give this thing a 2.1. Yeah, I don't want to give it anything higher than that. I do like Lone Wolf, though. Initiates Companion, 1 and a green for a 3/1 cat. Whenever this creature deals combat damage to a player, untap target creature or land. Oh, that's interesting. So it's, it could potentially have pseudo-vigilance, or giving one of your other creatures pseudo-vigilance. And or it can just ramp you in that you're untapping a land. And in Pauper, where we have some lands that tap for multiple mana, whether it's the Ravnica bounce lands or a land that you've put like Utopia Sprawl on. Utopia Sprawl just changes the color, doesn't it? Like Wild Growth. You know what I'm saying. There are ways that you can get a whole lot more mana. The Urzatron lands too as well. That's a way of potentially generating a ton of extra mana with this. The problem is it's a 3/1 and it has to do combat damage to get this effect. And your opponent should just be able to block this with basically anything. So you have to find ways of giving this evasion. You have to take out all of your opponent's creatures. This might work well with Ram Through, right? Ram Through is an instant that is a bite effect, so you can do a bite effect with this guy. The damage gets to your opponent, or damage gets to the opponent's creature, and then it opens this thing up to swing in. And at 3 power, it can probably use a bite effect pretty effectively. It's just too easy to take out. At 1 toughness, all sorts of spells and the festivities or electricity, little things can poke this guy and just kill him. The blocker situation is real. You have to spend more cards on this guy to be able to get this effect. Is this effect really worth playing all those extra cards to get? I'm not sure that it is. I think we have other ways of untapping lands and creatures if we really needed to. Freed from the Real, right? Freed from the Real. That's the Kamigawa one that can freed from. Yeah, that's the one that can untap enchanted creature. You can do some infinite combo stuff with that. And then there's also Arbor Elf, which can untap lands. There's other things that can untap lands as well. So I don't think there's anything specifically crazy good about Initiate's Companion. It's interesting though. It's okay. I don't mind this. I will give this thing a 2.4. Yeah, 2.4. It probably deserves more than that. If Lone Wolf's, we'll give it a 2.5. Bounce it up just a little more. Terrain Elemental, 1 and a green for a 3/2 Elemental. Yeah, that's not great. I mean, that's a pretty good rate for this creature. 2 mana to get a 3/2. In green, it makes a little bit more sense. But we just saw that Initiate, that's Initiate's Companion, which is a 3/1 for 2. It has a halfway decent effect on it, and this doesn't have any effect. So I don't know. Unless you have some kind of vanilla creature thing going on, which I don't think there's really any reason to play that in Pauper. There's commander cards that you can play. What is it called? Like, it's not Muraganda's Pulse, is it? Muraganda something. Muraganda Petroglyphs. There you go. Creatures with no abilities get +2/+2. Now that's a rare, obviously, so we're not talking about Pauper, but there are ways of making vanilla creatures fun. I've kind of wanted to make a commander deck because there is a Selesnya commander that absolutely works with. There's actually a couple of them that work with creatures who have no abilities that can do some cool stuff. And then you get to play cards like Enormous Baloth, which is, card I really like. Look at this guy. Again, 8th edition. Can you tell? I started playing Magic around 8th edition Mirrodin time, and so I have a lot of affection for these 8th edition style dudes. Good stuff. I like it. Look at that art. Beautiful art. We'll never see it on the channel because it's never gone down to common, and even if it did, we'd never play this, but look at it. It's so good. Anyway, Terrain Elemental, it's, you can do a whole lot better for your 2 mana than this guy. You can just get a creature that moves your game plan forward a little bit more than something like this guy does, and so he just won't really end up seeing play. I will give him a 1 point. I mean, I can't give him a 1 because Grizzly Bear. I've said Grizzly Bear's a 2. And Grizzly Bear's a 2 mana 2/2, and that's a vanilla 2/2. So this is absolutely better than Grizzly Bear. So it has to deserve more than that. I guess I will give it a 2.1 because it's not that much better than Grizzly Bear, but it is strictly better than Grizzly Bear. Next card is Crib Swap. I like Crib Swap. I don't necessarily like the Lorwyn Eclipse art. I like the Lorwyn art, which is basically all the other arts here, but the Lorwyn one is the one I remember because I was playing Lorwyn. That was my first pre-release was Lorwyn, and it was I started playing Magic around 8th edition and Mirrodin, like I said, but I never went to a pre-release until Lorwyn. And I remember getting crib swaps in my packs, but I was making like a blue red, no green red. Maybe it was a whole teamer thing. It was an elementals deck though. I had Smoke Breaker and that was fun. Anyway, crib swap I think is a pretty solid little removal spell. Not necessarily for Pauper, but just a good spell in general. 2 and a white for a Kindred instant with Shapeshifter. It used to be a tribal instant. They are calling them Kindred now. And it's got Changeling, which means this instant spell also has every creature type. That'll be interesting. You exile target creature. Its controller creates a 1/1 colorless Shapeshifter creature token with Changeling. So the thing that's cool with Crib Swap, especially from Lorwyn when it was in limited, but even as something you can play in Commander, is that when you can tutor for creature types, if it says like search for target elf or search for an elf in your library, you can grab Crib Swap. You can just grab a removal spell with a creature tutor, which is pretty cool. Or if sometimes there will be, look at the top 4 cards of your deck. You may put an elf card. You may put a merfolk card in your hand, and you could pick this as that card instead. It doesn't have to be a creature, and that's rad. I think it's cool to be able to get these types of spells in non-traditional ways because they gave a card like this Changeling, giving it every creature type. I think that's super cool. This is also potentially useful if you are looking for some type of card types in the graveyard, some sort of Delirium kind of deck. Kindred counts as a separate type of card, so it will add to your Delirium count if you're going to play that in Pauper. There's not a whole lot of Delirium stuff in Pauper, but it's a possibility. And the effect is all right. It exiles a creature, gets rid of them. We like that. We like, put that on a sneaky snacker. It's gone. Don't worry about that sneaky snacker anymore. Now it does leave a 1/1 behind. That 1/1 has Changeling, so if you're playing against a fairies deck and you try to exile one of their fairies, you're still giving them a fairy that they can use their Spellstutter Sprite with later in the game. And that's not always the nicest thing. You could do this on your own creatures, I guess, if you wanted the 1/1 token with Changeling, and I don't know, maybe there has like a leaves the battlefield trigger. You're probably not paying 3 mana to get rid of one of your own creatures, but I guess it's a thing you can do. The 3 mana does kind of kill it. At 3 mana, when you're thinking of a commander card for removal, you're probably just going to go with something like Generous Gift or many of the other cheaper kinds, Swords to Plowshares or Path to Exile or Erode or any of the new ones that are out there that are halfway decent as well. Get Lost. So Crib Swap doesn't really see a whole lot of play unless you're doing something fun with the tribal, the Kindred, and are able to search out this as a toolbox piece. But in Pauper, yeah, it doesn't really have a good place. I think if you're spending 3 mana on a removal spell, you can do something like Ride's End, which will also exile the creature, and that's generally going to be better. It's not going to give them anything in return. It's a little bit more narrow on when you can use it, but it is just tends to be a better removal spell, and even Ride's End doesn't get played all that much. So I like Crib Swap. I can't give it a great score, but I think we can go for something like a 2.8, 2.9. I'll go 2.9. Not quite a 3, but I value removal, and Crib Swap is pretty good removal, especially by exiling. We like that. So let's go back to this one so we can then go to random search. and see what our next card is. It's Frontline War Rager, 2 and a red for a 2/3 Kavu Soldier at the beginning of your beginning of your end step, not upkeep. If you control 2 or more tapped creatures, put a +1/+1 counter on this creature. So it can count itself. If you already swung with this guy, you only need to swing with one other creature. This thing gets a little bigger each turn. That's could be potentially tough to deal with. It is 3 mana for a 2/3. Not amazing, especially in red, where you probably want to go a little faster than that. And also just these incremental upgrades, the +1/+1 counters each turn. You can't really abuse that where you're getting more than that each turn. No evasion on this guy, but he doesn't have to have evasion because it just requires that the creatures are tapped. It's not a combat damage trigger or something like that. So it is kind of versatile. If you have ways of tapping down creatures either to vehicles or things like that, that's a way of convoke. That's a way of potentially getting this thing to get bigger each time as well. It does suck a little bit that this thing will never really be on defense because you want to tap the creatures down so this gets the +1/+1. Generally, that means you're going to be attacking with this guy or tapping him down, and because he's half of the creatures that you need. So if you tap something else down to give him the thing, okay, he gets the +1/+1 counter, but he's also tapped. So he's not blocking anything your opponents are throwing out, and you have to wait for this thing to untap. And by then you're like, well, I should probably attack with him now because he's bigger and he'll get even bigger if I do that. So now it essentially just kind of says, hey, this creature can't block. That's not true. You could block with him, but the situation is not conducive to you blocking with this guy basically ever. And I don't know. It's not like red needs to block a whole lot. They're all about doing damage fast, but I don't think this guy does enough damage quickly to make him part of that conversation of where it should go. So I'm going to give this guy... I'll give him a 2.5. I think he's a pretty normal common Magic card. And that's what I give normal common Magic cards. Young Red Dragon, 3 and a red for a 3/2 dragon that has flying, and this creature can't block, but it also has an adventure side with just Bathe in Gold. For 1 and a red, you get an instant. It says create a treasure token. Okay. It's fine. It is just fine. Not incredibly crazy. Yeah, you get this one-time ritual effect, not really ramp, but it does ritual to give you the treasure token. That's kind of nice to be able to put an artifact on the table to ramp you for a turn. That can be all right. Potentially even getting your young red dragon out on turn 3. That's fine. And then you got a 3/2 flying dragon. Can't block, but those are pretty good stats to jump in. Your opponent, what are you going up against that's going to be a problem for this? Sneaky Snackers can block this all day and trade with it. Glinthawks can block and trade with this. Core Skyfishers can block and trade with this. So I don't think 3/2 is quite enough stats, especially when you're like, this is a dragon, right? Dragons should be really strong. And Young Red Dragon, I don't think quite does that. I've seen people try, and I'm one of those people who have tried playing Gruul dragons and potentially even Teamer dragons with Tarkir Dragonstorm coming out. They added enough common dragons there that was kind of an archetype that you can do, and there's honestly a decent amount of enablers at common for dragons that will give them +1/+1 counters when they get in. They will make dragons cheaper to cast. There are those cards out there. You could make a dragon deck. The problem is if you're ever playing Gruul dragons, which is where most of the best dragons are, you should really just be playing Writhing Chrysalis, and eventually you'll find yourself going, hey, the dragons are the worst part of this deck, and you'll just end up making Gruul ramp. That's sad but true. That's kind of how it works. I don't think Young Red Dragon is enough to really break into a Pauper deck. I do like that it is card advantage being an adventure spell. You just get 2 spells for the price of 1 card, and That's pretty great. Once you cast the adventure side, it's really hard for your opponent to interact with that card. There's a couple that are also from, well, I think actually they're mostly from Eldraine, but there are a couple of cards that can mess with the exiled adventure spell or the exiled creature spell that is on the adventure at that point. But not enough that anyone plays them in Pauper. So it is pretty safe. That is nice if your opponent's playing like a discard strategy. This is a way of one, getting the ramp, and then two, or getting the ritual. Sorry, and two, protecting your creature from being discarded before you're able to play it. That's kind of nice. Not enough for me to really care about it too much. I think I can give this a 2.7. Yeah, 2.7. I don't want to go any higher than that. Scrap Diver Serpent, 5 and double blue for a 5/5 Serpent. This creature can't be blocked as long as defending player controls an artifact. Well, that shouldn't be too hard in Pauper. There's quite a few artifacts, even in the decks that aren't necessarily about artifacts. But you are paying the full 7 for a 5/5 here, and that's not going to cut it. We have enough Serpents already that are cheap enough that can be reduced cost, Cryptic Serpent, Tolarian Terror, you know the ones. And that just means this thing is extremely expensive and will never be played. So it's fine once it's on the table, but it's you got to get it on the table first, and you're not doing that. I will give this thing a straight up 2. Probably deserves even less than that, but we'll give it a 2. Got a couple more cards left. Satyr Grove Dancer, 1 and a green for a 1/1 Satyr Shaman. When this creature enters, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature. So you could put it on this guy, then it's a Grizzly Bear. You could put it on something else, though, and that could be potentially useful. And it's technically better in most ways. It's technically better than a Grizzly Bear because if you have proliferate effects, you can keep making this thing bigger where you couldn't do that with the Grizzly Bear. Yeah, okay. It's not good. It's not good. And also, I guess you are leaving, one of the downsides is you are leaving, because this is a trigger, if you target your own, this creature with the +1/+1 counter, your opponent has an opportunity to just poke this thing. Deal 1 damage to it, and it's done. You know, a lava dart. They could just lava dart this guy, and then you lost that. And they can do the same thing with any of the other creatures that you try to put the +1/+1 counter on. But this is, is this better than Grizzly Bear or not? And I would say most of the time, yes. But in one of the situations where it's not, is your opponent could lava dart this thing before you're able to turn it into the 2/2, and that wouldn't be great. Either way, you're not playing this card. I guess if you had blinky bouncy strategies, I feel like I talk about those strategies all the time, and it's because it's just my favorite way of playing Pauper. I've got a Dimir deck like that. I've got an Orzhov deck like that. It's just my favorite deck archetype. So I'm always thinking about it. Green is not necessarily one of the colors that blinks and bounces well, so that it's a little less useful in that case. I'll give this thing I'll give it a 2.1. I think it's generally better than the Grizzly Bear, but just not by much. Prowling Felidar, 3 and a white for a 2/3 cat beast with vigilance and landfall. Whenever a land you control enters, put a +1/+1 counter on this creature. We've seen cards like this do pretty well, but those cards are red, and those cards add a lot more power, and those cards are a lot cheaper than this. When you put all those things together, Prowling Felidar, while it sounds pretty good, I've got a 2/3 vigilance guy who generally gets bigger every single turn. That's kind of sweet. And it is, but 4 mana to get this thing on the board to begin with is a tough ask, especially when you have, if you're playing a mono white deck, those decks are just so fast now, either going super wide with White Weenie, or you're going wide and tall with like the Pack Beast strategy. which I'm really excited about. I think that's some really cool tech that we've seen in the last handful of sets to make a mono white pack beast deck turn into something that's kind of scary to deal with. I'm actually building that right now. But Prowling Felidar doesn't go in that deck. And then you got to ask yourself, well, then what deck does it go into? Like, if you're splashing white or bringing white into your color base, what kind of creatures do you want to bring in? And I don't think you're splashing white just so you can play Prowling Felidar. Pretty sure you're not. I think you just have better white options there if you're only playing a little bit of white. And like I said, if you're playing total mono white, I don't think it cuts it either. So while I think in a vacuum this is a pretty neat card, I think this is a solid cube card. I think you could make some fun Jumpstart packs out of this. In fact, it was in Jumpstart 2022, so makes perfect sense there. I think this is a really fun low power teaching tool for people who are just starting to get into Magic. This has enough mechanical density that it feels more than your typical, grizzly bear like I've been talking about all episode. But it still is pretty easy to understand. Hey, this guy attacks and he doesn't tap to do it. Hey, here's a trigger that you have to remember every time you play a land. Remember that trigger. And it's a good teaching tool. And eventually, when you're playing as a newbie with a card like this, and you are getting to put 3 or 4 or 5 counters on this guy, you're going, whoa, this thing's kind of unbeatable. And it certainly feels like that until you run into decks that actually play real removal or play explosive things that can just outpace this guy. But he's fun. I do like Prowling Felidar, and I will give it a 2.6. Spitfire Lagak. God, I love Spitfire Lagak. 3 and a red for a 3/4 lizard with landfall. Whenever a land you control enters, this creature deals 1 damage to each opponent. So another landfall creature, another 4 mana landfall creature. But this one, I think, is a little bit better than Prowling Felidar. You could argue that it's not, but for 4 mana, you're getting a 3/4 instead of a 2/3. So right off the bat, better stats. And this, is able to do non-combat damage. And so even if your opponent is all filled up on the board, you can still get in a little bit of damage. Again, 1 damage per land is not that great, but if you are playing, earth-bending strategies that when your land creatures die, they'll come back as just the lands. That's another trigger. If you're playing any sort of fetch lands, that's 2 triggers. You can make those things stack up every once in a while. Now, are you going to play Spitfire Lagak over something like Sabbatender? And no, you're probably not, because this is 2 mana. It's half price. It gets the same landfall ability. Now it's a 2/1. It does have reach. That is kind of nice. But if you are going down this route, I think you end up playing more Sabbatenders because you can get those out earlier when you still know you have lands in your hand. And you can do a little bit more damage with these guys, or play multiples of them and have those triggers stack up in a way that you wouldn't get with Spitfire Lagak. You could potentially play both of them in the same deck, I suppose. And if you're in a landfall deck, you should be playing a lot of lands. So maybe you are just ramping up to the point where you can play this guy. Maybe, but again, I think 4 Sabbatenders would always beat a Spitfire Lagak in your deck. So I think you probably go that route instead. And, I'm talking it up like Sabbatender is some Pauper staple. It's not. There are some fun decks that have used Sabbatender before. But I don't think this strategy is quite there in Pauper. I think we need a handful more pieces, and we just don't have those right now. Let's go with a... I think I'll give it a 2.7. I think it is better than the Felidar that we just looked at, but not by a really meaningful amount. Let's do a bonus card and call it a day. Our bonus card is Brothers of Fire, 1 and double red for a 2/2 human shaman. You can pay another 1 and double red, and this creature deals 1 damage to any target and 1 damage to you. Doesn't sound great, right? Well, it is from the dark, so things were a little different back then. We didn't make creatures as strong as we do now. But, it's got 4th edition, 5th edition. I do remember this card. I think I might even have a copy of it. I love this dude's design. Look at this guy. Look at that guy. I mean, this guy's also pretty cool, but I do like that guy. Anyway, three mana to put this on the board and to begin with. Already not great. And then having to spend that mana not every turn, because you can do this multiple times a turn if you really want to waste a whole bunch of mana. If you have infinite mana, or infinite colored mana anyway, then you can potentially win with this. I say potentially because it also has to deal the damage to you. If you don't have the life lead, you're in real trouble with a card like this. You should be in the life lead though. You're in red, so you're aggressive. You did some damage early, and now you don't mind. Crypt Rats does a similar thing to this, but Crypt Rats is also better. Crypt Rats is just better than this. It's great art, but it's a bad creature. I'll give it a 1.7. Yep. We'll end with Brothers of Fire. We'll see you next time on Common Knowledge. Till then, bye.